Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to go deep on Gaza. We're digging into a France 24 article, really unpacking the aftermath of those Israeli strikes. Plus, the whole geopolitical fallout, things are shifting quickly over there.
Yeah, quickly might be an understatement. It's a region already balancing on a knife's edge, right? And this France 24 piece, it doesn't sugarcoat anything about what's happening on the ground.
Right to the point. The article hits hard with the immediate impact in Gaza, especially Beit Lahia. At least 87 dead, potentially more missing, and over 40 wounded, all from these recent Israeli strikes.
And it's important to remember, Beit Lahia, this isn't just some random town caught in the crossfire. This was one of the first places hit by Israel's ground invasion just last year. So this attack, it really highlights the ongoing fight for control, for security, and sadly, Beit Lahia is right in the middle of it.
Reading about the families torn apart by this violence, it's just devastating. There's a story about two parents who lost all four of their children, and then another family, a grandmother, her son and his wife, and their four kids gone, all of them. Their entire building was destroyed. Just a brutal reminder of the human cost of this conflict.
Absolutely. And we have to acknowledge there are always different sides to every story, right?
Yeah.
Israel, they're saying they used precise munitions, that they were targeting Hamas specifically, that they're trying to minimize civilian casualties.
But then you have the Palestinian Health Ministry, and they're painting a very different picture. They're reporting way higher casualty numbers, emphasizing the impact this is having on innocent people. And then you add in Doctors Without Borders, they're incredibly worried about these attacks on hospitals in North Gaza. They're saying the healthcare system was already at its breaking point, and this is just catastrophic.
And that actually ties into another major problem highlighted in this article: information. With reports of internet outages in northern Gaza, it's not just harder to coordinate rescue efforts, it's harder to even know what's happening. So much uncertainty, so little reliable information. It just adds fuel to the fire.
You're totally right about that information control. And get this, the article, it goes on to reveal something really unexpected: leaked U.S. intelligence documents.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. We're talking about a whole new layer of complexity here.
You can say that again. So these leaked documents, which they seem to think are legit, they suggest that Israel might be planning an attack on Iran. Think about that for a second, a potential escalation on a whole other front. Apparently, Israel might have been getting ready for a strike, potentially in retaliation for the ballistic missile attack on October 1st.
And here's the kicker: the timing. While the U.S. has been publicly pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza, these documents, if they're accurate, suggest they knew about Israel's potential Iran plans.
Makes you wonder, right? About what's really going on with U.S.-Israel relations, how deep their involvement really goes.
It's like trying to untangle a fishing net after a hurricane. And if that wasn't enough, there's another major curveball: the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Talk about throwing a wrench in the gears. Ceasefire negotiations were already shaky at best, and now, who knows?
Yeah, Sinwar's death, that's a game changer, no question. What it means for Hamas's leadership, for their whole approach to negotiations, is still up in the air. Could mean more instability, more violence, or maybe, just maybe, it opens the door for new leadership, a new perspective.
Definitely something we need to keep an eye on. But of course, because it couldn't be simple, now the conflict seems to be spilling over into Lebanon. Like it has some sort of gravitational pull drawing more players in. It's like watching a fire spread,
Yeah.
You try to contain it, but it just keeps jumping those lines. And this France 24 piece, it really lays bare just how fragile the situation in Lebanon is right now. We're talking about a country already wrestling with its own internal struggles, now facing the very real possibility of getting dragged deeper into this conflict.
And it's not just talk either. The article talks about how the Lebanese army, they actually lost 3 soldiers in an Israeli strike. That's a serious escalation, right? Puts the Lebanese army in a really tough spot.
Absolutely. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they're trying to maintain their image, their reputation as this respected institution. But on the other, they just don't have the firepower to really control Hezbollah or to defend against a full-on invasion from Israel. Imagine the pressure they must be under, trying to navigate this incredibly volatile situation.
It's a tinderbox waiting for a spark. And the details in this article, they just paint a more and more intense picture. We're talking drone strikes targeting the Israeli prime minister's house, Hezbollah firing over 160 projectiles into Israel. It feels like things are spinning further and further out of control.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's the civilians who always seem to pay the highest price. The article describes a pretty grim situation in Lebanon with those civilian casualties going up, especially in Beirut. Israel's been hitting those southern neighborhoods, the Dahieh, Pretty hard.
And as the article points out, Dahe, that's a densely populated area, mostly residential. Even if Hezbollah is operating there, you're talking about countless innocent people caught right in the middle. This isn't just about military targets anymore. This is a humanitarian crisis unfolding right in front of us.
Right, and that's why you're seeing the international community getting more and more vocal. The article even mentions that U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has been urging Israel to dial it back a bit, scale back those strikes because of all the civilian casualties. This isn't just a regional conflict anymore. This is something that demands global attention, a real effort to prevent things from getting even worse.
It's almost overwhelming to think about. You've got the immediate crisis in Gaza, the possibility of a larger conflict with Iran looming in the background. Now Lebanon's getting pulled in. And then the international community trying desperately to get a handle on things.
It really shows you how interconnected everything is and how quickly something that starts as a regional conflict can spiral outward, become a global problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's something this France 24 piece does really well. It's not just reporting the facts, it's really bringing us into the heart of the matter, showing the human cost, all the different alliances, the tensions. It's a lot to process.
And speaking of going deeper, the article also spends some time on the situation in Jabalia, which is another one of those really densely populated refugee camps in northern Gaza. Seems like they've been hit especially hard, which is really saying something considering the overall level of destruction.
Yeah, and Jabalia has a pretty heavy history too, going back to the 1948 war when Israel was established. It's been a focal point for conflict over and over again. And today, it's home to a huge number of people who are already displaced from other conflicts. They're looking for safety, for refuge, and now that very place is a target itself. It's tragic.
And on top of everything else, they're facing yet another wave of displacement now. The article mentions that Israel issued these evacuation orders for the entire northern third of Gaza, even Gaza City.
Can you imagine being told to leave your home, your life, everything you know, and just go?
Yeah.
Try to find someplace safe with no idea what to expect when you get there. And the article, it highlights how many people followed similar orders last year, but around 400,000 stayed in the north.
And they're saying those people who left before, they haven't been allowed to go back.
Nope. They're stuck. It's heartbreaking, really. Caught between the devastation they left behind and the uncertainty of their current situation.
This isn't just a conflict, it's a humanitarian catastrophe on top of a catastrophe. And this France 24 piece, it really drives that home. It's not just presenting the facts, it's laying bare the human cost of all this in a way you just can't ignore.
And it's hard not to notice the echoes of history here, right? The way this current crisis is playing out, it mirrors so many previous chapters in the region's story. It's like a reminder of how cyclical this violence is, how quickly tensions can flare up, and how desperately we need a different way forward.
So much to process. We've talked about the immediate aftermath of these Israeli strikes, the human toll, the different narratives about the strikes themselves, those shocking U.S. intelligence documents that leaked, the death of Sinwar, Lebanon getting pulled into the conflict, the pressure from the international community, and we still aren't even done yet.
It's true. It's easy to get swept up in the headlines, the latest developments, but you're right. We can't lose sight of the bigger picture here. This isn't something that just sprang up out of nowhere.
Exactly. And this France 24 piece, it does a good job of bringing us back to how we got here. They talk about the Hamas attack back on October 7th of last year, a day that really shook everyone, right? I mean, that assault breaking through Israel's security fence, over 1,200 people killed, most of them civilians, that sent shockwaves around the world.
It was horrific. And it's not over, not by a long shot. They took over 250 hostages, remember. And the article, it says they think a third of those hostages have died. It's just unimaginable, the human cost.
It really does feel like that attack was a turning point, a major escalation in the conflict. And the effects, they've been absolutely devastating for everyone involved.
Without a doubt. Since then, Israel's offensive in Gaza has led to the deaths of over 42,000 Palestinians, at least according to the reports from local health officials. And those numbers, those are just raw numbers. They don't differentiate between, combatants and civilians. It's a sobering reminder of just how brutal war is, how that line between who's fighting and who's not gets blurred so easily.
And even beyond those numbers, the sheer scale of the destruction is hard to wrap your head around. The article mentions something like 90% of Gaza's population, that's 2.3 million people, have been displaced because of this conflict. 90%. Where do they even go? What happens to a society when practically everyone is uprooted like that?
It's almost beyond comprehension, the level of humanitarian crisis we're talking about here. And it makes you think about the future, right? The rebuilding, the psychological impact on all these individuals, these communities. the very fabric of a society torn to shreds. It's something this France 24 piece touches on, even though they're focused on the immediate situation, these larger long-term challenges that aren't going away, even if there is a ceasefire.
It's hard to see a way out, isn't it? When you lay it all out, like the ongoing violence, the political layers, the history, the humanitarian crisis, it feels like this endless cycle of violence and retaliation with no end in sight.
It's daunting. There's no denying that. But I think as we step back from this deep dive, all these stacks and figures swirling around, the stories we've discussed, we have to remember that behind those statistics, those are real people, living, breathing human beings, dealing with the very real consequences of this conflict every single day. And it's their resilience, their hope for something better that should inspire us to keep pushing for a peaceful resolution.
You're right. It's easy to get overwhelmed, to feel like there's no hope. But as you said, we can't afford to turn away. This deep dive, it's been a harsh reminder of the human cost of this conflict, the desperate need for a different path. And maybe, just maybe, by really understanding the complexities, by listening to those human stories at the heart of it all, we can start to envision and then work towards a future where peace isn't just some far-off dream, but a real possibility.